All right, it has gone 9:30, so I will open this Public Transport Committee workshop. It's part 4 of an extended process to review the regional public transport plan. Remembering this is a high-level policy document rather than down into the weeds. I just want to make a mention of, you'll see a name here, Claudia Cameron. Claudia, can you just put your camera on for a second? And the reason being she has joined our governance team, and so it's a listen and learn, but really welcome to have you here, Claudia.
Sure, so, thank you.
For those councillors who haven't met her. So we will open this up, and can I advise members that this public workshop is being recorded and will be made available to the Bay Regional Council website as soon as possible following the conclusion of the workshop. And I think I should tell you that opinions... Oh, we're listening to somebody in the background. Opinions expressed or statements made by individual persons during this workshop are not the opinions and statements of the Bay Regional Council, and the council doesn't accept liability for any opinions or statements made during the meeting. So without further ado, I'll ask Namuta to give some opening thoughts, and then we'll hand over to Bron Healy, who will take us through this workshop this morning. So Namuta.
Tēnā koutou to the chair and to the committee. Today we have our 4th Regional Public Transport Plan workshop. I'll hand over to staff shortly, but essentially we'll be doing a recap of our journey. We'll be reviewing the new sections. We'll be looking at our new and revised policies, and we'll be rounding out the conversation with a look at next steps, as well as including consultation and our engagement. As Councillor von Danielson has said, our key lead staff are here to support the conversation, and I'll be handing over to Bron Healy, our principal planner, shortly. And we also have in the background, no doubt, James Llewellyn and Matthew Kilpatrick, who you also will see on the screen at some stage during the workshop. So I will hand over to...
Before you do, I forgot to do the apologies, and then Councillor Thompson would like to make a comment. So calling for apologies. The apologies I have are Mayor Webber, Commissioners Tolley and Silver, they're doing their long-term plan deliberations today, and Councillor Rose. We don't need those moved formally, but those are the apologies that I have received. Are there any further apologies? There have been none. Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I just wanted to flag that at some stage during the staff presentation, could they just give us an idea of how we are going to respond to the emissions budgets and action plan that are going to be announced? Sorry, the budgets have already been announced, but the actual action plan, how we're actually going to be able to consider that and respond. Just if staff would be able to address that issue, I'd be very grateful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm sure they've taken that on board, so that's fine. So we'll hand over to Bron to get us underway, keep the job moving.
Thank you, Chair, and morning, everyone. So I'll just share my screen. So can everyone see that?
Yes, we can.
Right, okay. So let's get underway. Okay, so starting off with the purpose of today's workshop, obviously it's to review the full draft of the Regional Public Transport Plan with a specific focus on the new content prepared since the previous workshop in February. So I'll run it with a similar format to our previous workshops. briefly running through the presentation, summarising the key points, and I'll stop at points along the way so that we can have some feedback and discussion on each section. And as we move through, I'll endeavour to capture some notes from the discussion. So I guess our desired outcome from today is that you as members are getting to a point where you're largely comfortable with the direction and content of the draft RPTP document, and you're reasonably ready to make a decision to release the plan for public consultation at the next Public Transport Committee meeting in June. Obviously subject to any amendments or revisions arising from today's discussion. So just a very brief agenda. I'll give you a little reminder of the background and process for the RPTP review, then start running through the draft plan with a focus on that new and revised content. And then at the conclusion of the workshop, we'll have a wrap up and talk about next steps. So just looking at background and process, this is really just a reminder. I've probably told you this a couple of times before. The RPTP is the key statutory document for public transport planning and investment in the region. Must be reviewed as soon as practicable. So we process with the aim of having the new RPTP operative by the end of this year. And you'll recall we had 3 previous workshops as a committee in October, December and February this year.
Bron, you froze out a couple of times there, not too badly, but you might, if you've got excess stuff on your open, it might help if you close something. Thank you.
Okay, I'll try that. Yeah, and so getting back to process, at the 16th of February workshop, PTC gave direction on the emerging draft document for Tauranga and the Western Bay of Plenty, and also discussed several key policy proposals. So at today's workshop, we'll be looking at the new sections that have been added to the document. We'll talk about the future strategy sections for Rotorua and the Eastern Bay of Plenty subregions, and then the remaining policies in the document complete that section. So moving on to the draft of the plan. The part 1, the background is largely unchanged, so I'll move straight into part 2, the context. So there's been a few updates and revisions to this section. First of all, there's a new section 2.1.3, which is really just a summary of the Regional Land Transport Plan, so it's summarising that broader regional transport policy direction in the RLTP that is provided for the RPTP. There's also another new section on funding. This is basically describing the funding context and sources for public transport. And there's also an explanatory box in there describing the relationship between fares and other direct costs of travel. You may recall from the previous workshop, there was quite a bit of discussion around road pricing and other mechanisms that can be used to achieve mode shift and to encourage greater use of public transport. So starting to recognise that wider context for public transport, and particularly in terms of fare settings for public transport and how it needs to relate to these other mechanisms.
Bron, we have a question from Councillor Nees.
Oh, thank you. Sorry to raise this. These are not matters that have been changed since last time, but I just wanted to note a couple of things in the context area, if you wouldn't mind, Bron, if that's okay, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, keep going.
Firstly, on page 27, under rates, we only talk about targeted rates in Tauranga and Rotorua, but we also target rate Whakatane, and I think maybe we need to update that. It's the like third paragraph from the bottom on page 16 of the document, 27 of the agenda. I've sent you these comments through, but I thought I should raise them. Also, on page 33, when we talk about the challenges, I think what's at top of all of our minds at the moment is the safety and security of public transport at the moment, of both our bus drivers and the public that are driving, riding the buses. And I just wonder if this isn't a challenge that we shouldn't be recognising. Just a thought, because while we do have safety and security way back in the document, we don't cover it at all in the objectives or in the focus areas. And so I was wondering about whether we should add in safe somewhere in the objectives and in the focus areas. So anyway, that's the main things in that context. Also, just with the summaries, the PT services in the region that we've got there, are they all correct and up to date given our recent adjustments? I only asked because Whakatane and a Hopi service says it operates several times a day, which for me, I think that's about 3 to 4 times a day. And I noticed that we've got 7 services a day on that network. So I just wonder whether we shouldn't adjust that word slightly so it doesn't give a false impression. Yes, and we're not up to recent developments on page 41, are we? So
we'd rather do it as we go through. Give Brom. So your comments are noted. The one with security in particular, I think it is a high risk for us, and so therefore it should be a focus area. Totally agree with you, but I'm sure staff have taken on board what you've said, Councillor Nees. Bron, you want to keep going, or do you want to comment on any of those?
Certainly, yeah, taken note, and see what we can do with those comments. All right. So yeah, still in part 2 context, challenges and opportunities. There's a new section in there, which is really providing a regional context for those challenges and opportunities. So this sort of evolved out of our discussion at the last workshop, where a number of matters were raised, and I guess we needed to provide a little bit more context for the scale of the challenges we're facing to achieve our objectives. So in response to that, we've added a new section on the impacts of COVID-19, and then also talking in the Tauranga Western Bay context, which has its own challenges, that is around some of the obstacles to delivering the public transport elements of the UFD Connected Centres program. So you'll see in terms of the COVID-19 section, it talks about the patronage impacts of the pandemic, some of the government requirements that came through over the last sort of 24 months, how the regional council and operators have responded to those challenges. And then it also raises some of the potential longer term impacts of the pandemic, whether they're in economic terms, the tourism sector, and also working habits. So there's also a text box there talking specifically about the Western Bay of Plenty sub-region in Tauranga. And this is around the challenges of delivering the UFD connected centres. So we're talking here in terms of dispersed land use and traffic growth, some of the topographical challenges, the fact that traffic gets channeled through a small number of pinch points, low land use densities within the urban areas, and that continuing trend of traffic growth. And I guess the other side of the coin is also, as we implement the program, there's going to be ongoing roadworks and physical disruption, and that section endeavours to recognise that and say, well, actually that's going to come on for a while, and we're doing our best to manage the system as it transitions from one type of system to another. So that was that section. We've already sort of briefly discussed.
Before we move on, Bron, Councillor
Okay.
Thompson just wanted something, I think, on that section.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under the UFD issue, we talk about traffic increasing by 8%, but I wonder if we can have a breakdown of what that traffic is. I mean, a lot of that will be freight, and I think I'd like to see the breakdown of that. I'd also like to understand the household vehicle growth in numbers. And the other thing, Bron, is it relates to my earlier comment that next week we're going to have the emissions action plan. And I'm struggling with actually getting a handle on the specifics about what we are trying to achieve in terms of greenhouse gas reduction. The RLTP has one figure, and we have in our plan different figures. And I just wonder, what I'd like to see is some really hard targets that we really can understand and that are very, very clear. And I guess that won't be able to happen until we've understood what is coming out next week. But I wouldn't mind a comment from you on that if that was possible. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Bron.
I understand that point. So obviously the RLTP target is for the wider transport system, and the RPTP we're talking about the context for public transport. So basically public transport's contribution to that wider target. I have done some sort of looking in terms of, that is consistent in terms of delivering the mode shift that would support that target. In terms of the wider response to the emissions reduction plan and the budget, that's obviously a movable feast at the moment. It's something that we are obviously trying to be proactive in responding to and developing our own transport emissions reduction plan in-house. And I think it's almost like waiting for that to evolve and seeing what that response is, and seeing how we can deliver on that in terms of the public transport components.
Councillor Brunning.
Yes, thank you. We talk about dispersed land use and traffic growth and topography, harbour peninsulas, etc. And I know we do elsewhere talk about where people are going, park and ride. Shouldn't we be identifying places where park and ride will mainly feature? I don't know that the public is getting a view that the likes of Whakamaramara, it will not have a bus service going around it, but if they drove down to park and ride to Mokoroa, they could then get on a bus and go to Tauranga. So it's part of an education policy, but just how we're going to deliver these centres out in the dispersed area.
Bron, comment.
And I I understand there's some preliminary work or indicative locations for park and ride worked out through AFTI and the TSP process. So some of the more detailed maps that came out of those documents. I guess they're indicative because it was subject to confirmation in terms of a business case for that facility, whether it would generate the demand and would create the outcomes that we're seeking.
Through the chair, shall we continue?
Sorry, I
Yeah.
was on sound. I just said keep moving.
Okay, got that.
Yep. Welcome, Chairman Leader.
Okay. So yeah, moving forward. So there's a descriptive section on our current regional public transport network. As we said, that's a sort of a description of the current network in each sub-region, plus regional connections, total mobility and school services. And there's also a section there, 2.5 recent developments, which just highlights some of the, I guess, the recent achievements in terms of things like B-card, real-time information, and some summary table of the recent developments that have occurred across the network since the previous plan.
Can I say, I said to you yesterday that I think we, as a policy decision, we should be thinking about the if we're doing any heavily subsidised services, that the use of a B card should be compulsory, so that we can get better real-time information. Can you incorporate that into the high-level policy?
Yeah, I'll have a look at that, Councillor.
Thank you, Councillor Nees.
Thank you. Just regarding that table on page 30 of the plan, that's page 41 of the agenda. I note there it says the extension of Super Gold Card concession is a trial which is currently running until 30 June 2022. So I did ask earlier on in the week if that's been extended, or if there's a process for it to be extended, or if it's already provided for in the annual plan that we're consulting on. And then later on page 73 of the agenda, when we give more detail on Western Bay, it says the Waihi Beach service contract expires in June 2022. So I think we need to be very careful about our dates, make sure that they're right. And also particularly since we're reconsidering free fares for school children in the annual plan as a result of the security and safety issue. And we've got those in the plan as the trial running until December 2022. So just to make sure that we've covered off all of those contract completions, that they're correct, and that if they change, we've got a way of changing those in the document.
You do need to recognise that when you talked about the Waihi Beach one, that is the contract. That's a matter of fact. It's not a trial. It ran from 2017 to 2022, and then it will be up for review, renew. And Bron might like to talk about that.
Well, through the chair, I can probably answer that one. So we are in the process of reviewing that contract with the intention of bringing a paper forward to the Public Transport Committee in June to discuss whether we wish to renew that contract. So that will be dealt with then. In terms of questions around Super Gold, we will look to be dealing with those through the discussions at the annual plan deliberations session next week. My understanding, although I am just checking this out, is that there is provision in the long-term plan to keep going with the Super Gold Card trial, but we can certainly make sure that that is fully discussed and explored next week.
And similarly, have we got the funding for the Waihi Beach trial, not trial, service, if we decide to keep that going?
My understanding is that we have, but again, I'm working with transport advisors in my team just to understand that. You may be interested to know, I'll be very brief, that in the annual plan for Waikato region, they are looking at a service from, I think it's Paeroa to Waihi Town to Waihi Beach. So that would actually provide a more frequent connection between Waihi Beach and Waihi Town. So if that was successful and got through the annual plan process, I think the intention is to start that in early 2023. So just something to be aware of.
And with regards to the Super Gold Card that we will be discussing the annual plan, have we been in discussion with Waka Kotahi as to whether they're prepared to help fund going forward or not? Yeah, will that be a consideration?
It will. We're in discussion with Waka Kotahi about quite a few things.
Yeah.
At the moment, as you might imagine.
Yep. And the budget might tell us some more things anyway. Thank you.
It might.
Thank you. Moving on.
Okay, so that was basically the end of the slides on the part 2 context. We've already had quite a few comments on that. Was there any other comments or feedback to wrap up that section? Otherwise, I'll proceed on to the next one. Chair, your microphone's off.
The chair, your mic's off.
I try to keep it off with my funny throat. Any comments from any members of the committee? No, it looks like people are up to date with where you're going. Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to part 3. So the main change within this section is in the focus areas. This was, I guess, in response to a previous discussion at our February workshop. There's a new customer-centered focus area added to the top of the box there. So the direction in that is we will work proactively to identify customer needs and deliver a competitive service offering and pricing that encourages more frequent use. There's also in the policies and actions and associated action to undertake some market segmentation analysis, including a better understanding of what customers' willingness to pay. So that's within the fares and pricing actions, and that's really looking into, or I guess thinking about our conversation last time around really understanding who the customer is and what their motivations are and how that how they will respond to different I guess financial mechanisms or incentives to for public transport.
Brian, recognising with Tauranga in particular that the issues that we have with congestion around the CBD Cameron Road upgrades, which is likely to go through to 2024, and recognising this is the first 3 years of a 10-year plan, is there anything that have we taken exceptional mitigation matters for that into account? Is there anything we can do at a policy level to help? Do we recognise it in the plan? I'm just not sure.
It's a really good question. I think the sort of the approach in the plan is to really encourage best practice in terms of the delivery of things like infrastructure that supports our services, and referencing all the best practice guidelines and so forth. So you're probably talking more about best practice in terms of how we maintain a functional system while delivering these major projects. So that probably needs some further thought from me.
Yeah, I think it's a major issue, and no disrespect, but it's somehow we need to get a policy thought around it, because somehow we have to mitigate as best we can. Anyway, Councillor Nees, you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just reiterating my concern about the safety and security issue, and just wondered if you could work in the objectives, either an objective on service and infrastructure delivery, or customer experience and information, some words around safe and secure service. And then similarly in the focus area, because we talk about identify customer needs, and you know, under that is safety and security, but I think it would be helpful if we actually have those words up in lights, particularly since safety is one of the key platforms of the GPS. Even though it's safety, road safety, it is public safety. The other thing, the collaborative focus area, I'm just very aware of our discussions that we're having with Tauranga City on, is there a better way to organise ourselves and deliver public transport, something that's more effective, that's more seamless and integrated. And I'm not sure that the wording that we've got under collaborative actually captures that. We talk about working alongside our partners and communities to deliver transport solutions, but not about finding a better way to integrate our service delivery. And I just wonder whether others agree with me that might be something that we need to have some words around. I know it's something we're certainly focusing on in the Western Bay, or particularly in Tauranga, through the joint PT committee that Andrew and Paula are working on.
Any comments?
Yes,
And then we'll have, after that, we'll have Councillor Brunning.
Yep,
Namuta.
absolutely. Oh, yes, absolutely. We'll see what we can do to incorporate that, linked to the collaborative focus area. Yep.
Councillor Brunning.
Yes, thank you. It might be a strange area to raise it, but this is high level, and what I'm asking is probably not high level, but it's around the economics. You know, this is heavily subsidised from all different directions, and so what we are endeavouring to do has to be subject to funding. And then there's also the challenges of the infrastructure that we've had over the last few years, and I think we'll continue to have. And we also have the inability to deliver at times. So I'm just wondering about, where does the reality come into all this? Whether they're focus areas or not, I don't know, but yeah, it does worry me about the economics. There's a limit to what the ratepayers can fund on their side. There's a limit on the passengers, what they can fund. There's a limit on what the government can fund. So it's really quite a conglomeration of funding sources there that trying to bring it all together to a service that is very uneconomic is a challenge for me.
Can I just, before staff comment on that, I think it's a really valid point that Councillor Brunning makes. I think somewhere and whether it's in this document or elsewhere, we do need to have a clear understanding of what each of our service, whether it's going to a Potiki or within Tauranga City, what is actually costing, the breakdown of the true cost of the service, and what portion each party, the fare paying person, the ratepayer and the government are paying, because it's some of these services are exceptionally expensive, and we will resolve that if we can get mode shift and get, when I say mode shift, getting people onto a bicycle won't help our economics. It'll help with congestion, but if we want to make these buses effective and efficient, we actually need to get mode shift onto buses, and that's my priority. But I would like to see staff actually have a table, and whether it goes into this document or it's just for the next PT committee, tells us, so that we really are addressing the economics of this thing, because it is a major issue for our ratepayers, for ourselves, and for Wakakatehi, and we don't know what level of funding they'll do, but it sounds like they're going to up the game. Thank you. Comments, Brian or Namuta?
Through the chair, we can certainly look at that and how best to bring back that information and in what form. So certainly staff will look into that.
Thank you. Brian? You're right, Brian? He might have frozen.
So through the chair, I think Bron has frozen.
Yeah, we might need to poke him. I don't know how you do that. Is there a plan B? But Chairman Leader, let's have you.
Thanks, Chair. Look, I was just going to endorse what Norm had said, and it's the absolute guts of the whole issue. And I don't think it's particularly hard. I don't think there's probably a public transport system in the country and internationally that doesn't survive on some form of subsidy. And I think it'd be pretty relatively easy to, what's the level of subsidy in Wellington on buses, trains, Christchurch, Auckland, to get an understanding. But it then gets down to where's the cart and where's the horse? Do you drive people onto buses first, or do you provide the service first? I don't know the answer to that, but I think in terms of public utilisation, as you know, we're probably at the lower end of that. And at the end of the day, it gets down to scale. And I feel, even though we run free public transport for students in the Western Bay here, especially in Tauranga, to bypass their local school, and that's the decision we made in full knowledge of that, I think we need to remind ourselves that and say that parts of the Eastern Bay, there are parents who choose to bypass the local school, but they pay the full cost of that transport to the alternative. So we've got to be careful that we're fair to everybody. I'm not suggesting that we extend that to the Eastern Bay, but that's the financial reality that some people face. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you. Have we got Bron back?
I hope so. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. We can't see you.
I've been told to turn my video off.
Okay.
So that might help with matters. Sorry, I got kicked out of the meeting.
We're very fussy who we allow in.
So Bron, the presentation is down as well.
How's that?
Yes. It's back.
Okay. I don't know if you missed my opening discussion around the future strategy.
No, we never got any of it. So start again on that, please.
Yeah, so I guess the purpose of these sections is to outline our future PT strategy for each sub-region and our regional services. You may recall we discussed the draft content for Tauranga and the Western Bay of Plenty at the previous workshop, and we've produced some new content for Rotorua and the Eastern Bay and regional services for today. So I'll just proceed through them. So the first section, future strategy for Rotorua. There's three main aspects to this. In the immediate term, it's the bus network refresh process that is currently underway, and then moving into contract renewal either in 24 or 25, and then beyond that, the longer term strategy for the sub-region. Excuse me. So starting with the first component, the Rotorua bus network refresh. So the key focus here is really to address declining use in Rotorua on the services. So two key aspects of that is optimising the current service offering and endeavouring to improve that convenience for the customer to try and get more customers back onto public transport. You may be aware that public consultation is currently underway in Rotorua for the recommended network. So subject to that consultation and the outcomes of that, which will obviously come to the Public Transport Committee, there'll be implementation of services and infrastructure from this year, and then a process of monitoring and reviewing.
We've got two questions on the Rotorua. Do you want to take them now, Brian?
Certainly.
So we have Mr. Thomas, followed by Councillor Thurston.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Brian. Look, and I won't go into the detail of this, but I just wanted to flag that with the consultation that's going on at the moment, that we have several concerns about the consultation, and really about in terms of how many people we're actually reaching under the current strategy for consulting. So I'll come through offline to you and James with those concerns, but I did just want to flag them here that I think in Rotorua we're feeling that consultation is not going particularly well, and we need to be reaching more people to come up with a viable solution. Otherwise, we're just going to continue to have the declining numbers that we've been seeing in the last couple of years. So just wanted to flag that. Thanks.
Through the chair, absolutely open to all and any suggestions in terms of improvements that we can make. So looking forward to that feedback.
Councillor Thurston.
Chairman, my question was exactly the same as what Phil's just posed, and I don't know whether Matthew wants to comment or James, and I see Joe's also on this Zoom today, and Joe went through a similar process a year or so ago, but it was basically an update and a gut feeling on how the public consultation is actually going. But it's essentially the same question that Phil Thomas asked, but if staff could comment on how it's going, and are they happy with the catchment and the numbers of being involved in the process. So essentially that was the question.
Yeah, through the chair, I can provide a brief update on what I understand to be going on at the moment. So when I asked the question about the numbers of responses at the end of last week, I was informed that we're up to about 50 so far, which in comparison to the previous consultation is actually not too bad, because in that instance I think only about 20, so somewhat better than the previous consultation. But having said that, I do agree that if there are opportunities to ramp up what we're doing, particularly now as we're out of the red status in Omicron, which was the situation when we started planning for the consultation, then we're certainly happy to look at any engagement activity we can undertake over the next couple of weeks. So I know that staff are planning to come down to Rotorua both next Monday and also on the 23rd to engage safely, hopefully, with people face to face out on the network to try and drum up some more engagement in the process, and we're certainly happy to liaise with you, Councillor Lyle, and also Mr. Thomas, to see who we might want to go and talk to during those 2 days. So we're really open to suggestions. We know we're going to be at the mall. We're hearing back, I think, from the college about perhaps going to go and speak to them. We'll be going down to various bus stops in the CBD and around the CBD to engage with people there, but certainly happy to take any other suggestions, because now we're in orange, we can do things a little bit differently compared to red.
Yeah, Chairman, just a supplementary. I think it's so important that we engage with people at bus stops and we actually ride with them on the trip and talk to them, because as we know, some of the most entrenched views about PT are from people who, when you confront them, have never actually used PT in their life. But I think it's the users that we really do need to target. So full marks, James and the team.
Yeah, thank you.
Well said, Councillor Thurston. Moving on.
All right, so the two following components of the future strategy, obviously with the Rotorua operating contract coming up for renewal in 2024, with the possibility or the potential for an extension to 2025, that would allow us to incorporate some of the broader considerations into our strategy. So in terms of those things, we're talking about the sort of whole mode shift demand management program, and obviously there's a sub-regional behaviour change and demand management program being developed at the moment. Looking into that whole financial sustainability equation that's obviously been raised already, in terms of the sustainability of their service in economic terms. We're working with our colleagues in Rotorua Lakes Council, looking at how the public transport can be integrated with the future development strategy. So where is urban intensification, residential and industrial or employment land going to be situated in the future, and how can the public transport network be integrated with that? Thinking ahead to the post-COVID tourism sector, obviously optimistic of a return of international tourists, which is a key sector for Rotorua, and also with our bus fleet decarbonisation feasibility study, looking at the recommendations that might come out of that. Beyond that, the longer term strategy is continuing to explore some options and opportunities for the sub-region. If we get some good outcomes from our shorter term delivery, can we look at service levels on key urban corridors,
Brian,
especially if they're being intensified?
before you go on to the regional, let's just finish off Rotorua. And the question I have for you is, this is not just a COVID issue for Rotorua. There's been a declining, and we on page 54 of the agenda shows it, a declining that's been happening for several years. And have you addressed that and the cause and how we're going to mitigate that and turn that around genuinely? I mean, that it's a major issue that I can see, and there has to be a reason, and if there is a reason, how do we mitigate and to turn that around? Because we're not doing what Rotorua, we're doing it very badly in patronage numbers, and somehow we have to. Do you want to comment on that? And then I'll have Mr. Thomas and Councillor Thurston again to wind up on Rotorua.
Ron, did you want me to talk to that?
Certainly.
Yeah. So just through the chair, this is, you'll recall our refresh project is really key in this space. We acknowledge the decline in numbers over the years. So our immediate action is to look at what straightforward changes that we can make straight away. And so we're engaging on that at the moment. So that's really key.
You, Mr. Tom. I hope it's as simple as that, but it looks like it's an ingrained problem. Anyway, Mr. Thomas, then Councillor Thurston.
Thank you, Chair. And look, you summed up one of the big issues we have in Rotorua with that continuing declining numbers. And I think that's where my concern around the refresh that we're consulting on at the moment comes from, because we really need that refresh to get people onto the buses. And my concern runs over into the contract renewal, because, and I see, you know, your bullet point there, improving financial sustainability. Well, we need more people on the buses to make them sustainable. At the moment, when I'm driving around Rotorua, and I live outside of Rotorua, which is why I have to drive in there, the buses I go past often have one or no people in them, and that seems to be the norm at the moment. I'm concerned, you know, I think when we do our renewal, I've mentioned this before, the need for us to be looking at decarbonisation for our fleet, and it worries me that if we haven't got financial sustainability, then that will be very hard to do, and then suddenly we're 10 or 12 years out before that can happen. And that decarbonisation has more than just an economic impact for us. You know, we have real health issues around our air quality. So any carbon-based vehicles that we can get on the road, and heavy transport especially, is vital for us, especially in the inner city. So I just wanted to stress how we do need to get the numbers up on the bus, which the chair has raised as well.
Councillor Thurston.
Thanks, Chairman. Just a couple of comments. As I've always said, and everyone on the Zoom's aware, the terminus in Rotorua used to be on Pukawatua Street, where a number of government agencies are, and we were bringing in over 1 million passengers a year into the CBD. At the time of the terminus being there, at the request of RLC, just to remind us all again, we moved that terminus 2 blocks to Arawa Street, and from then on it was all downhill. And that's why I've raised it a number of times talking to Tauranga colleagues, just to be aware that when you start considering moving it even 1 block in Tauranga, be prepared for a similar reaction I anticipate that's occurred in Rotorua. But as I say, that was 1 million passengers used to be brought into town every year. So the other thing is, Rotorua is incredibly unique, as Phil Thomas will back me up on. It has 2 CBDs. The old CBD, many politicians have always said that it was actually too big for a town of 60-odd thousand people. But we do effectively in Rotorua have 2 CBDs. So it leads me to the question about the orbiter, to connect those 2 CBDs. And it's to you, James. Is the RLC, do they still have an appetite in your discussions at a staff level for the orbiter concept, connecting our 2, quote, CBDs?
Yeah, through the chair, I think there is certainly an appetite for that. We feel that the changes we will make as part of the refresh will actually go a long way to meeting that orbiter concept, because one of the challenges in Rotorua at the moment is that you have buses tending to go in different directions around the CBD, which actually makes it incredibly challenging. So you might be able to get to where you want to go in one direction, but then have to go somewhere else to get it back in the other direction. And that's something we're certainly looking to change. And so there'll be a consistent pattern of buses going around the CBD, connecting down to the lakefront and also to the hospital, because as you know, the dynamics of that area are changing very rapidly. So we think we'll actually go a long way to meeting that requirement through the refresh already, without actually having to invest any further funding in it. But again, it'd be interesting to see in the consultation exactly how that concept will land, and whether people will actually feel it will enable them to get around the CBD in a much more convenient and safe way.
And Mr. Chairman, I'll shut up after I say this, but one of our greatest achievements and most proactive initiatives was to have a number of bus routes actually going through the hospital grounds. And that's been incredibly well received by the public and the users here. So I know there's a similar push in Tauranga, but it has been phenomenally successful here. And I thank all concerned for that. I will now shut up.
Now, Muta, you want to make a comment?
Oh, yeah, just through the chair, I guess just acknowledging that mode shift is very difficult to get people out of their cars, particularly when a number of households have vehicles and onto a bus. And there's many factors at play here, including parking policies. But we do know that in order to get people thinking about other modes of transport and making those other modes more attractive, we know that PT services need to be frequent, reliable and direct. And so the refresh work that's going on will look specifically at those components. The other levers that you've pulled as part of the PT committee providing recommendations to regional council, you'll recall, is the free fares. So free fares for students going to and from schools is currently in effect. And also to acknowledge the behaviour change piece of work that staff commented on before, which is also underway. So there are a number of activities that we are undertaking to try and pull as many levers as possible to enable that mode shift to occur. But we do acknowledge that it is very difficult. Yeah.
Thank you, Namrita. Bron, or who's moving on from here? Where are you, Bron?
So through the chair, Bron will move us through onto the next section.
So we're still, yeah, that's okay. We're still at the end of this section. I think after we get past monitoring and review, we'll have a morning tea break.
Okay.
Yep. So yeah, I'll just go through the strategy for Eastern Bay, and then we can have a break. So this is a similar, quite similar approach to what we're doing in Rotorua. So we have a bus network refresh process that's just sort of kicking off in its initial phases, so slightly behind the Rotorua process. Some key aspects of that are a set of early interventions where we're looking to really optimise existing services, particularly the Ohope Whakatane service, to see if we can streamline that service a little bit and provide more convenience to the customer. And then a key aspect of the refresh process will be making some recommendations on a future service delivery model for the Eastern Bay. So asking those questions whether for some of the services, scheduled fixed route services are the way to go, or whether there are alternative options that we could look into, for example, community transport services or on-demand public transport. So that'd be an interesting component of that.
So, Bron, do you have any feedback for us on how the community service, the on-demand that the community is providing at the moment, how that's working, and what input are we putting into it, and just so we have a good understanding of it, please?
So I guess the community transport model, we're probably not as well developed in the Bay of Plenty as other regions. They have some sort of formal frameworks where they support community vehicle trusts to actually get services up and running. So looking at places like Canterbury, Waikato, they have some models that may be useful for places like the Eastern Bay. So yeah, that's really work that needs to be undertaken to see whether that might be something that would suit the Eastern Bay.
Yeah, through the chair, I actually received an email yesterday from the people at Eastern Bay Villages, and it appears they are pretty close now to setting up some kind of entity, which is going to start the process of coordinating all the various activities currently going on and looking for opportunities to deliver new activities in the future. So that's actually quite a good piece of news, I feel, and really positive, and hopefully we can play a strong role in that as regional council moving forward.
Through the chair, your mic is off.
Sorry about that. Joe, I saw you had two hands up there. So what you're going to contribute is going to be doubly important, I'm sure. Joe.
No, thank you, Chair. Just building on what James said there, the trust deed for the accessible transport trust was signed off earlier this week, so that is all up and running now, and they'll be starting to progress some of the actions that have come through from that trust.
Excellent. Okay, Brian, back to you.
Yeah, so this latest slide's really just providing a little bit more detail on the refresh process, and then some of the longer term considerations that we can factor into the contract renewal. So in this space, in the Eastern Bay, there's a spatial planning process underway. There's also a whakatane, or I think might be expanded to an Eastern Bay transport strategy process underway that we're participating in. So we'll be looking at some of those processes for what sort of direction they might provide in terms of longer term public transport. So, for example, where they're going to locate future commercial and residential areas. And again, like Rotorua, we've got the sub-regional traffic demand management and behaviour change program for the Eastern Bay, which is sort of starting to scope up something that's tailored for the I guess the nature of the sub-regional community.
So you skipped over the bus fleet decarbonisation, and I recognise that the best decarbonisation method that we can use is to actually get more bums on seats, because unless we have at least 7 people on a bus, we're not competing with a car on a carbonisation basis. So that's the first thing. But we do have hard targets by central government for of 2025 for no new buses that aren't EV or zero carbon, and then is it 30 or 35 that all our fleet has to be of zero emission. So there's some big challenges there for us. Have you thought about that and how that, or is that too far out that we don't have to worry about it yet? I don't know if James or Brian who
through the chair. Yeah, I can certainly do. Yeah, it's work is ongoing already, so we are engaging a specialist consultant to help us progress our bus decarbonisation feasibility study, which was funded through the LTP. So all of these really valid questions will be reviewed, and some conclusions come to over the next 6 to 9 months. So my anticipation is really by the end of this calendar year, we'll be in a lot better position to understand, what our options are and what are the most promising options for decarbonisation. And that's going to look at the whole range of things in terms of, what type of buses do we want? Do we want to own or lease assets? How do we get more people onto public transport as well with those decarbonised buses, as you rightly say? That's absolutely critical. And where we're going to get the power from, and what power source we're going to use. Are we going to be battery electric? Are we going for hydrogen? Is there some other option? So all these kinds of questions will be getting into some kind of order through that process. So I certainly anticipate by the first public transport committee of the new triennium, we should be in a pretty good space to come up with some recommended ways forward in terms of our future strategy. So yes, just to be very clear, there's a lot of work to be done, and we're getting on with it now.
This is a high level policy document that needs to be completed by the end of 22 this year. Should we be putting a bit of emphasis, or is it, noting that it's a 10-year document, you know, I'd like to see something even at a very high level to signal that we are really genuinely concerned with decarbonisation, how we're going to go about it. Councillor Thompson asked for real targets, and I think that's really valid. You know, should we be putting it in this document though? That's the key. You're saying we won't be ready to, but is there some high level stuff so that we can signal to our community that we are actually addressing it and are thinking seriously about it?
Yeah, through the chair, I think we can certainly highlight the government mandate as being what we absolutely have to deliver, and we can also flag that we are undertaking this bus decarbonisation feasibility work, and if there are opportunities to accelerate the introduction of decarbonised buses, then we will certainly look at those. And fundamentally, it comes down to a council decision about when we want to introduce decarbonised buses versus when we have to, and whether those two are the same or different.
Yep, thank you. I'll just open it up now to Councillor Nees, followed by Councillor Thompson, followed by Councillor Thurston. Councillor Nees.
Thank you. Just, I totally support all the comments about needing to beef up commentary around a range of actions for carbon emissions. And for example, I know that Auckland has got an electric ferry, and we've got a policy in or an action to do a review of ferries as options in the future. But I think, you know, we need to consider all options, and whether we need to mention that as an example, I don't know. But my question is more about, it is a very dynamic operating environment, and we haven't got all of the strategy pieces together, which would normally drive up the regional public transport plan. And for example, James, you mentioned the strategy work being done in the Eastern Bay for the public transport. So the question for me is how we can either signal that that's going on and will require some perhaps changes to what we're proposing, or we allow, depending on the time frame for those bits of work, an opportunity to bring them in before we sign off the plan as a final plan, whether it be done as part of the submission process. It's just, I know that the mayors in the Eastern Bay are, you know, really quite passionate about having a say in designing a strategy for the Eastern Bay, and that might substantially change what we are proposing here. So it's a question of how we are going to ensure that this document is as up to date as we can possibly make it when we finally sign it off, given the emissions plan is coming out, the government's changing as part of the RMA changes, it's going to be changing the Land Transport Management Act as well. There's nothing we can do about that, but this needs to be as up to date as we can make it, and make sure that what we've got is lined up with the strategy that's coming through, whether they be spatial strategies or whatever.
Yeah, through the chair, I can only agree. I think there's a lot of moving parts at the moment, and certainly our transport emissions reduction plan, which is work that, again, we're seeking to deliver through this current annual plan process, I think will give us a lot more clarity about what is required in the different areas of the region. So somewhere like the Eastern Bay, we clearly have a big challenge because in a lot of the geographic area, there is simply no conventional public transport. So if that is going to remain the case, what other options are there that are low carbon, whether it could be, for example, low carbon electric van or car sharing projects. Community transport is always something that's talked about. So there's a whole series of things we need to start thinking about, particularly as we will have a contract change in the Eastern Bay in 2025. And the key question we have to ask ourselves is, does the future service provision look broadly the same as it is now, or is it going to be very different? And I would suggest that given where everything is going, it probably will have to look quite different from what we're providing at the moment.
And through the chair as well, just to confirm that we will follow up. We have already been linking in terms of the PT strategy, so we will link in terms of the timeframes to work out how we can accommodate further any updates in relation to the strategy and have the most up-to-date information for you and the best mechanism to be able to do that. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, Councillor Nees basically has posed what I was going to pose as well, which is the linkages of all of the spatial transportation work that's happening across the region. I note that the Regional Transport Committee, in its terms of reference, has a responsibility for oversight and monitoring of all of that work. And so I'm presuming that the Eastern Bay work is very firmly on the Regional Transport Committee agenda. And that's where the linkages, need to, I think, be occurring. But I'm intrigued. I'd love to know what the scope of the Eastern Bay work actually is and who's driving it, but that can be an email discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thurston.
Chairman, it's basically, the question's been asked by Councillor Nees and Councillor Thompson, but it's essentially around the Eastern Bay of Plenty transport strategy, and to you, James, answering, the question that's been posed by Councillor Thompson in particular. Can you just remind us all how it all dovetails in together and comes together?
Well, what we're seeking to do in the first instance is undertake a review of our current provision and whether it's really meeting both current and future needs. And following that, we then have to look at different options for how we might actually then provide transport, particularly for people who currently don't have regular access to a car, but then also, and this is critical, for people who for lifestyle and contribution to sustainability reasons actually do not want to use a car or use it as regularly as they might. So one of the things we will need to do as part of this process is work out how we engage with the communities in that part of the world, because they're clearly very different from those that we have engaged with in both Tauranga and Rotorua. We have very different challenges in somewhere like the Eastern Bay. There are various opportunities coming through, particularly from Waka Kotahi. So there is currently an innovation fund that has just been announced. So there are potential avenues for getting funding if we can get that list of activities together that we can actually have ready to go for funding. So whether that's through the emissions reduction plan, whether it's through the travel demand management behaviour change work, which we'll be discussing at our next RTC. There's really some really good opportunities, and the key will be to how we pull that together into that strategy, as you say. And for me, it's about making sure the next LTP and our LTP fully reflects the strategic needs of all of our areas, and that's for me a critical piece of work. So we're already looking essentially starting the next RLTP now, you'll be pleased to know.
Okay. To Namuta and to James, can you just ensure it's a plea from the Regional Transport Committee, and I imagine this committee also, but it's just a plea that Councillor Eaty, Councillor Clark and the Chairman are fully involved and fully in the loop with everything pertaining to the Eastern Bay refresh?
Yep, absolutely. And we acknowledge the work that the mayors are driving in terms of that the PT strategy in the East and our connection between the two.
Because people like Councillor Eaty in particular have got huge knowledge with regards, marginalised communities, and would be an invaluable resource, so use them.
Okay, I think we've all got that on board, and that's a good thought, Councillor Thurston. Bron, are we back to you? How are we going?
Just briefly, the final section in here is our regional services, so the intra-regional services currently that link the different parts of the region. And there's a brief section there around our future plan for those, which is to review the current trials of tertiary commuter services. And beyond that, to prepare a regional bus services strategy, which is probably going into more detail around assessing future intra-regional demand and proposing a network that would deliver a faster and more attractive service offering. And obviously, James has already highlighted some potential initiatives that are underway in terms of cross-boundary services. So there's a commitment there to continue to work with Waikato Regional Council to look into potential demand for those cross-boundary services. Obviously, we have that proposal for the Paeroa Waihi Beach, which is an interesting one.
Yep.
So any further feedback or discussion on the future strategy sections?
We've got two hands up, so we go with Mr. Thomas, followed by Councillor Nees, and you're between us and a cup of coffee.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very quick then. Look, I just wanted to add, when we're looking at the future strategies, that I think we need to take account of the fact that Rotorua is now a Tier 2 city in terms of housing development. So Tauranga is a Tier 1, but Rotorua is now a Tier 2. So we're going to have considerable number of new houses and new areas being developed in Rotorua over the next few years, especially in terms of public housing. There's a proposal coming to council tomorrow. So I think we just need to be aware of that when we're planning our bus services. And I think it might have been Councillor Thurston who mentioned that there are two philosophies. You wait till you have the customers and then provide the services, or you provide the service and that way you get the customers. And I think with new housing developments, I think you definitely have to provide the service to get the customers. If you wait till the houses are built and the sections are all taken, then people are already in the habit of using their cars. So I think we just need to look at that, and there are a number of strategies that could come into play there. Short feeder routes to main roads, maybe when there are only a few houses in an area, the on-demand service. So really looking forward to see how the trial goes in Tauranga, but it could be a great thing to extend and try in Rotorua as well, especially with those newly developing areas. Thanks.
Thank you. I think staff will take that on board. We do have some evidence from that with regards to Tauriko. When we first started there, we did put the transport in ahead of the houses, and it actually let staff come back to us on that, but it wasn't overly successful. The theory was great, but it didn't quite work out. Councillor Nees.
Thank you. We sort of skipped over Tauranga and the Western Bay. I had a comment that we have specifically mentioned the on-demand trial, both in the Rotorua Future Strategy section and the Eastern Bay Strategy section, but we didn't specifically mention it in the Western Bay Tauranga section. It's only in the future development table. So I just think we need to put a bit of text in somewhere, whether it's after the AFTI section in the Tauranga Western Bay strategy, that we are doing that work and that it might offer some opportunities for better services to some of the areas that are harder to get at or off the main commuter routes.
Do you want to comment, James?
No, I agree. I think that's exactly what we should be looking at. So no, that's good feedback. Thank you.
Okay. Are we happy? Are we ready for a cup of coffee? It is now 10:50. Let's come have quarter of an hour, and then we'll come back at 11:05. If that. Thank you. So welcome back to our public transport workshop. and we continue. So is Bron there?
Through the chair, we've got Bron online.
Yep,
Okay.
I'll reshare my screen and we'll kick on to the next part of the workshop.
Okay.
Okay, so now we move into the policies and actions area. So you'll see from the draft document that we have 7 objective and policy areas to implement the plan. So what I'll do is go through each of these areas in turn where there's new policies have been added and talk through some of those proposals and get feedback on those. So the first policy area is around mode shift and carbon reduction, and you'll see in the draft plan there's a new policy there on transport pricing, and this was added in response to our to the previous committee direction that we needed to recognise and advocate for tools for other tools to achieve mode shift, particularly road pricing. So that's the rationale for that policy.
It's interesting, Bron, that the discussion so far in the media with regard to that looks like it's possibly only Auckland and Wellington that they're sort of talking about. There's been no mention of Tauranga at this stage.
Yes, I believe that was the report released by the Helen Clark Foundation and WSP. So that was looking at a couple of case studies in Auckland and Wellington and the potential for congestion charging there. Yeah, so probably, interesting timing. And we'll see where that goes with if the government is going to pick up on that with its emissions reduction plans.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with what you've written in there, though. Advocate for investigations into it. So, yeah, it's a bob each way, really. Mr. Thomas, have you got a question?
Yes, just a very quick comment, Chair, if that's all right. And just around that congestion charging and also using parking costs as a tool in that area. I think we just need to remember that even within our region, we've got very different dynamics between the different sub-regions. You know, Rotorua is a very different situation in that space compared to Tauranga, and I'm sure Whakatane is very different again. So I think we just need to be aware of what might work in one area won't work necessarily in another one of our sub-regions. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, Brian.
Okay, so the next policy area is service planning and design. You'll see there's 3 new policies added to this section, highlighted in red there. The first 2.4 is urban public transport network operating models. So this is a fairly, I guess, generic policy that emphasises working with our partner organisations, particularly our 2 urban networks, Rotorua and Tauranga, to develop an appropriate network operating model for each of those. And obviously we have the in the Tauranga Western Bay sub-region, we have the public transport services and infrastructure business case that's currently underway, and part of the scope of that is looking at the operating model for this particular sub-region. And in a similar vein, I guess there's an action there to work with Rotorua on something that's on a bespoke model that's tailored to that particular environment.
Your comment on total mobility, do we have any sight as to excuse me, the numbers of, for instance, wheelchaired, which is only one part of it, but wheelchaired people, we have stepping buses, and we try to support total mobility wheelchair use on our main buses. But do we have any data? Are we able to collect the data as to who's using the service and what are their impediments to using the service if they're not?
To be honest, I've never seen any specifically relating to wheelchair users. Obviously, through our B-card data and so forth, we would be able to capture concession users. But how you break that down, it would almost be like a manual recording, I think. I'm not quite sure if I'm able to comment on that.
Councillor Thurston?
Chairman, to use the total mobility scheme, it's provided by designated agencies, and the people that use it have to meet a pretty tight criteria, but they would be able to provide, the people when they've applied for the concession card or booklets as they used to be, will have designated what their disability was. So I think apart from the privacy legislation getting in the way, I'm pretty sure that information that you're seeking would be available.
Yeah, I'm sure we're getting the use in the total mobility services, but are we attracting them onto our buses? And because that's a more effective way, efficient way for us to service them and better for them, cost-wise than the total mobility service. But should we be targeting? Have we been talking to them as if they're not using it? Is there a way we can actually help them to use it, or are we just wasting our time with it within the bus service, not the total mobility? I've got no problem with the total mobility, but can we encourage them to get on a bus, and how do we do that? That's what I'm asking.
I think the big issue here is the ability to access the buses. They may be some distance, or there may be geographical boundaries, or they may be out of town or living on the perimeter of built-up areas. There's a whole raft of things. But the agencies who are authorised to provide the concession books, they'll have all this information at their fingertips.
Yeah, through the chair, I completely agree with Councillor Lyle there. We have a big challenge in being able to get consistently good access for mobility impaired people to bus stops. And that's absolutely critical in terms of trying to improve the service we give. It's no good having great access to the bus and in the bus if they can't actually get there in the first place. And certainly, just speaking as an able-bodied person, I find crossing the roads in parts of the region really challenging because of the volume and speed of the traffic. So goodness knows what the mobility impaired person is experiencing.
Thank you.
I've just had a note from Oliver saying that bus drivers should actually record wheelchair users much the way they record bike rack use. So it's certainly something we can look into to see if that's a potential data source that we can make use of.
Thank you. Appreciate that, because that would be valuable.
Okay. So the final new policy in there, or revised policy, was in relation to school services. And the committee members may recall that we had a discussion about this a couple of workshops ago. So the new proposal is probably a less prescriptive policy. So this has followed a little bit of further analysis on the potential implications. So this is the new policy proposal. Obviously, it's slightly wordy, but it contains quite a few different elements. So the intent is for this, or the wording notes that it will apply to new or additional service proposals only, i.e. it won't be retrospectively applied to existing services that are already provided. So the key criteria are a minimum level of forecast demand for that service and a reasonable degree of geographic proximity. And by that I mean that most of the route is located within a local or a adjacent school enrolment zone. So there's some additional considerations for secondary students, recognising that they're probably better equipped to use the public transport system for some of their school travel needs. So there's criteria around whether they can be adequately accommodated on the existing public transport network. And there's also some thresholds there for when we would provide additional services on existing routes, and that they relate to the capacity of the service and whether demand is outstripping supply. Yeah, so interested in people's thoughts on that updated policy.
Keep going, Ron.
Deadly silence there so far. Okay, then move on.
Right, moving on to the next policy area, which is service and infrastructure delivery, and this is where the majority of the new service, the policy proposals since the previous iteration of the plan have been put in. 3.1 contract units, the table has been completed with service descriptions and contract start and end dates. 3.2 new units is the process for when new units will be considered, and that largely repeats the previous RPTP policy. 3.3 public transport services. These are the services that are identified as being integral to the network, so that's the legislative requirement, and those have been added to Appendix B. A new policy, 3.5, innovation and technology, which is really about taking a proactive approach to responding to new innovations and technological improvements, so improving our, for example, organisational capacity to respond to those. 3.6 relates to service quality, so this is partnering with the operators to improve that customer service aspect of our public transport system, and there's associated actions around giving drivers access to appropriate training opportunities, whether it's in customer service or driver efficient and smooth driver training.
Comments on that page? Councillor Nees, followed by Councillor Thurston.
Thank you. This is where I'd like to see an addition of safety or security. So, for example, on page 62 of the plan, page 72 of the agenda, objective 3, if it read public transport services and infrastructure combined to deliver a safe, reliable, punctual and high quality customer experience. So that's bringing through that safety. And then what I would suggest is that under public transport infrastructure, because this has been an issue for us, we might have a bullet point which covers off security services at interchanges or bus stops, just because it has been an issue where we've had a local authority that hasn't been keen to come to the party to help us provide security around our interchanges. Just a suggestion.
Comment, staff.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, look into those recommendations and see what revisions I can make.
I think Councillor Nees is absolutely right. It is a very big issue at the moment, and we would be remiss not to include it in our long-term strategy, recognising the risks and seeing how we can mitigate them. Councillor Thurston.
Thanks, Chairman. Bron and James, I may have missed it or it may be yet to come, but where does the policy re-accessibility concession that we introduced in July last year, where does that set? Am I to be excited that it's coming up, or has it been omitted by mistake? Or
I think it's certainly referenced in our recent development section, but I'd probably have to go back and look at the fares and pricing policy section, but I can certainly note that down and do a review.
Yeah, it's just the accessibility concession that we introduced in July last year to huge fanfare and to overwhelming public acceptance. So can I just leave that with you in the meeting?
Certainly.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. Look, just wondering where we're listing the public transport services in Appendix B. I think I've found the right place. We have talked about looking at the possibility of interregional services as well, and I don't see that in the list. I may be wrong because I'm not sure I'm in the right place in Appendix B, but I just wonder if we should be including that. And also support Councillor Nee's comments around the security, and this is just really for my information. I haven't heard anything, but have we been having, I know we've been having issues in Tauranga, have we been having similar issues in Rotorua recently? Or I know, you know, we've put a lot of work into our patrols along areas, you know, for people walking about, and I'm just wondering if we're having any issues on our buses in Rotorua.
Through the chair, I'm certainly not aware of any systemic issues in Rotorua. The guy who deals with our security contracts works within my team, and as you can imagine, all of our time has been taken up with Tauranga. So we're very grateful to the citizens of Rotorua for not giving us any more challenges than we already have. So as far as I'm aware, if there are any incidents, they are likely to be pretty isolated, and we're certainly of the view that things in Rotorua seem to be operating pretty smoothly at the moment.
Councillor Nees.
That's great, thanks.
Thank you. Just also under policy 3.7, service performance, if we have put in safety and security in the objective, I wonder if we needed something to reflect that we're working with partners and operators to improve the safety, reliability and punctuality of public transport services. So we're adding in that aspect in there as well, and whether we need another bullet point or something, which is something like reviewing personal security and safety and acting appropriately to mitigate customer concerns or something like that.
Thank you. That's noted.
Will do.
Bron, keep going.
Okay. Final section of service and infrastructure delivery. So for new policies there around vehicle quality standards, vehicle size and weight, procurement and exempt services. Probably the only one I really perhaps wanted to look at or talk about in any detail was the vehicle size and weight policy, which you'll recall we had quite a discussion on this at the previous workshop, and this policy proposal basically reflects that discussion. So it's around having a flexible policy approach into vehicle size and weight, but taking into account a number of, I guess, critical factors when you do that, and also ensuring that we comply with the government requirements and the urban RUB, which is a requirements for urban buses, particularly the accessibility requirements. Yeah, so welcome any feedback on that or other bits in that section.
We have 2 hands up. We'll go with Councillor Thompson, followed by Councillor Nees, followed by Chairman Leader.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wonder whether we could add customer appeal into the matters that we're going to take into account, because we continually hear that people are turned off by, oh, you're right, there,
Sorry.
Mr. Chair? No. Turned off by the large buses, particularly that are, you know, just hopping around our suburbs. And so, you know, smaller buses, I think. So I just wondered whether customer appeal could be added in or not.
Yep, certainly consider that.
I think perception is a very important aspect, and that's, so I totally concur with you. You know, we actually have a very good service, but it's because people see empty buses, they don't want to get on them, and of course this crime rate wave is not helping. Councillor Nees.
Yes, thank you. I don't know whether it can be woven in, but part of our issue is the weight of these heavy buses when they're electric buses. So I just wonder if we could weave in something like practicality and for as a low carbon vehicle, or I don't know what the words are, but it has been a stumbling point for us. So maybe we could think about the practicality aspect. Thanks.
Perhaps fit for purpose would cover it, because you're dead right. Some of these big electric buses in our suburbs are causing issues that have been brought to us by TLAs. Chairman Leader.
Thank you, Chair. Similar question to Councillor Nees. I noticed that by 2035 you want all buses, that's regional buses that run, say, from Portakey up to here, to be electric. And that's probably achievable, but just out of interest, what is the tier weight of those electric buses that service now, or not that they're electric, but what would be the tier weight? And that then introduces the issue of having a bus that fits for purpose. There's no good at having a huge bus that's got 6 passengers in it. And what are they in town here, do you know? And what is
It's about twice the weight. EVs.
So
James, you might know that.
And what is the range of some of those buses if you want to convert the regional ones to that activity?
So through the chair, in terms of the buses that operate in Tauranga, the EVs, of which there are 5, the rear axle weight is the key issue, and they're currently 12.6 tonnes. Now, it is worth reiterating that NZTA have provided dispensation for these vehicles to run on the network. So any implication that they are operating in areas where they haven't been approved to operate, in my view, doesn't have at the moment any evidence associated with it. So all the way through the process, our operators have been very diligent in making sure they do have the correct approvals from NZTA. In terms of the question of range, generally speaking now, electric buses are able to get up to about 350 to 400 kilometres on a single charge, but that does depend on things like the number of passengers, the topography, and also even things like average temperature, all things that put more strain on the battery. So in any discussion about fitness for purpose, which is, I agree, an absolutely key issue, bus decarbonisation work will need to look at the route characteristics of the various parts of our network and make an assessment of whether battery electric is the way to go, whether hydrogen could be an option, or whether there's some other hybrid alternative, particularly in the short to medium term, because the government mandate doesn't come in fully until 2035, whereby all of our buses have to be zero emissions. So we've got some time to look through the options, and if necessary, introduce some interim solutions which will at least reduce the levels of carbon from where they are now.
Well, thank you, Chair, but the question I've got answered was not the one that I thought was going to get answered. The thing that concerns me with what James has said is that there's a dispensation regarding axle weight applying to electric buses, which does not apply to the general transport fleet. And you really need to think about that if we're going to play that out till 2035, because the roads that those buses travel on, in my view anyway, are probably not accessible to the 50 max vehicles anyway, and therefore lies in the problem that if you've got an exemption for the rear axle weight limit, the destruction of the local transport network in terms of the TLA roads is something that they've probably got a reasonable complaint about. But it's not our issue, it's really NZTA's, isn't it?
Well, but if we're good partners with our TLAs and we want to work collaboratively, then we have to find a solution that actually works for their roading system as well as what we're allowed to do. So we have to be pragmatic, in my view, to get a solution that works.
Thanks.
So through the chair, we will absolutely look at that vehicle weight and size policy to see how we can look to amend to include the comments that we've received today, particularly around the customer appeal as well as the weight of the buses into the future.
Yeah, just noting that it does cover weight, and also factor 4, their road network characteristics is obviously it's talking about the receiving environment. So if the road is built for 50 max or high weight vehicles, then they're obviously more suited to larger electric buses. If it's not, and it's going to cause damage on the road, then you need to look at other options, I guess, in terms of vehicle size and weight. So that's probably the intent of the policy at this stage.
Okay, we've covered that. Let's move on.
Okay, so section 4 and policies, public transport and land use integration. Just noted that the park and ride policy, the wording has been revised following feedback and discussion at the previous workshop. So it's probably a softer and less prescriptive policy than the previous version. And there's a new policy there on rapid transit, which is outlining the approach to rapid transit and with particular application to the Western Bay of Plenty Tauranga sub-region. So I'll just talk a little bit briefly about that. In the plan, there's a couple of explanatory boxes. One is really defining what rapid transit is, and then another box talking about the potential for rapid transit in the Bay of Plenty. And this covers our policy approach in the plan, which is in that short to medium term, progressively delivering those frequent and reliable public transport services on the UFD connected centres corridors. But then thinking longer term, working with our partner organisations to future-proof the system for a potential longer term transition to a higher capacity rapid transit system when, for example, if you're thinking out 70 plus years, Tauranga and the Western Bay has a population projection of 400,000 plus people. So that's the policy intent, and that's reflected in the wording. And there's obviously some key rapid transit actions noted as well. So it's around, in the short to medium term, getting those the public transport priority measures implemented on those corridors. But longer term, thinking around a rapid transit strategy and action plan. So how do we future-proof ourselves for a very long-term transition to a different type of system? Yeah, so yeah, interested in feedback on that.
Through the chair, I
I
see
was
Councillor.
on mute again. Councillor Thompson, sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Bron, how is the issue of the PT corridor shown on UFTI in terms of Matapihi? How is this all going to play out?
It's a really good question. So we have that indicative potential future corridor, which is signalled in UFTI. Really, I think, yeah, I think the sort of the strategy and action plan would have to go, how do we future-proof that corridor much longer term in terms of using it as potentially for rapid transit. That would require probably some detailed business case planning around that proposal.
Well, and I think a similar question I have with the proposed extension, and I think Cambridge Road to 23rd Avenue. I mean, these are indicative only. UFTI has not been formally consulted on. And so I'm just urging us to think carefully about how we're going to merge the particular processes around the UFTI consultation through the Joint Spatial Plan for the Western Bay and these proposed, but certainly not finalised, transport corridors. I do think it's an issue again of we need to be thinking about the integration of how this is all going to work. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. The next, we will get on to partnerships in the next section, I think. So that'll come up again there. Bron, keep going.
And here we are at partnerships. So there's some 3 new policies in here. And so these are around building partnerships with funders, Maori community groups and local service providers respectively. And it's really about how do we partner with them to better identify opportunities to serve their access needs in different communities. For example, the communities and local service providers is particularly focused on provision for rural parts of the region and how do we better provide for their access. And there's been several actions identified in the draft document to support these policies or implement them. Yeah, so any feedback on those proposals?
Can I just float one idea under actions for partnership and shoot you down, might completely out of the ballpark, but advocate for simpler and consistent transport planning, making decision frameworks. You know, I just think the business case process is just absolutely painful. And at the RTC, we've definitely talked about all these different pots of money that are available for public transport. It's not simple, it's not transparent, it's very hard to negotiate. Things get turned on, things get turned off. And I was reading the news this morning about the budget considering extending half-price free fares, and I see Christopher Luxton saying that public transport needs to stand on its own. He's not in support of any subsidisation of public transport. So think of that, if we get a national government, what that might mean to this plan and where we're going with it. So I don't know, it's about having some sort of role to try and ensure some longevity and simple and consistent processes for approval and funding of core transport services. I worry that we're going to be in a deja vu as we were like 6 years ago, when suddenly the GPS changed and all of our efforts in public transport are going to be turned off because we have a complete change in political environment. So I do believe there is an advocacy role for agencies such as the Regional Council and local authorities.
Comment, Amita?
Yeah, absolutely. We will consider how we can incorporate something within the plan to that effect.
Moving on, Dom. Bron.
Okay. So that's the end of the policies and action section. Just briefly to complete the plan, there's part 5, monitoring and review. So this is the area that contains our provisions, including performance measures, the variation process, our significance policy, and the review process. So going back to our earlier conversation around updating the plan, responding to changes in the operating environment. So basically the direction from the legislation is that we can update the plan at any time. Obviously, if the update or the change is considered significant, then we do have to undertake public consultation on that. But that doesn't necessarily mean a comprehensive review process. You typically do those once every 3 to 10 years. So I guess there is capacity there to update the plan if suddenly we get a new, a major new sort of change in policy that is going to impact on the plan itself.
Councillor Nees.
Thank you. Brian, you skipped across the fees and pricing section, and I think what's in there is as fine, as good as it goes, except the action undertake a comprehensive regional-wide fee review to give effect to the fares and pricing policies. We haven't really done this piece of work. We've consulted a number of times and it hasn't landed. I thought we were going to have the feedback from the public to enable us to inform this plan, and we haven't got it. So I just want to know when we're going to take this comprehensive region-wide fare review, and how frequently should we be doing it? Because I just think we've got a whole lot of policies, but we've not integrated what we've been asking the public about, because we haven't actually had a lot of airtime to talk about it.
So through the chair, I can have a go at answering that. And as you're aware, there's an awful lot of activity going on in the fare space at national level. And as you referred to a few minutes ago, Councillor Jane, the potential for half-price public transport fares to become a permanent feature of life. So one of the first things I think we need to do is, if that policy does come to pass, just understand how that is going to operate and whether that will result in a change to the Waka Kotahi fare policy. So that's the first thing to say. But irrespective of the national policy, you're absolutely right. We do need to get a better understanding of our own fare policy and how it's going to achieve our objectives, which are around mode shift, they're around social equity, and they're around financial sustainability. And how do you balance those 3 aspects? So what I'm looking to do in the first instance is to get a technical piece of work commissioned, which essentially provides a bit more information on what the options might be, not only for fare policy, but also for how we deal with the ticketing side of things. So just to give you an example, one thing we could actually do relatively quickly is introduce a fare cap. So we would say that if you're a regular user and you get up to, say, $10 spent in any one week, then any trip you make after that would be completely free. So you would only pay so much. Now, is that sort of loyalty system something that we're actually interested in pursuing? Because we can actually do it relatively quickly through the existing ticketing system. So what we want to do essentially is get a view as to what all of these different options might be, how they impact on those three key objectives around mode shift, social equity and financial sustainability, and come back to you essentially with a range of options and things we could actually do. Some of those you might like, some of those councillors might not like. And of course, it's important to be very clear that we have to take our communities and passengers with us on this journey, understand who really will benefit from concessions, and we've certainly introduced a lot of those, and also those who may be willing to pay for a service so that we can actually get some revenue in to invest in our future network. So that technical piece of work I'm looking to commission fairly shortly, and certainly interested in any initial comments from councillors about some of the possibilities around things like fare capping, and whether there's anything we can introduce relatively quickly that might actually just start to show that we are shifting the dial and we're not just doing the same old thing week in, week out.
This is an area where we need good science, i.e. data, to make good decision making. And we've had, it's only a short period of half price fares on buses across the whole region through the government incentive. Do we have any data yet? I mean, you gave us at our last meeting, I think you gave us 4 days worth of data. Well, that's not really much help. But now we're how long in are we? Are we 6 weeks into the half price things? Are we? Is there a substantial uptake as a result of it? You know, what are the lessons learned? And then is it different for Tauranga versus, because of the congestion issues, versus Rotorua versus the Wakatani?
Yeah, through the chair, that is certainly something that I'm liaising with my transport data systems team on. So what we'd be looking to do is provide an update on exactly that question to the next public transport committee, so we can hopefully get some indication of the level of change as a result of the half price fares policy. Of course, there are a lot of factors which influence people's desire or otherwise to travel. COVID has certainly been a major factor in depressing levels of demand, and I still feel that we're not where we need to be in terms of recovering from COVID. So any data has to have a number of caveats associated with it, but we can certainly provide the data we have got in terms of what happened up to the start of the high price fares, what's happened since, and also compare what happened in the same period last year, again recognising that there may be different COVID circumstances involved. So that is something we can certainly do for the next committee meeting.
Yeah, I think that's really important that we actually see that data. Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, I'm wanting to go back to the policy around communities. Is that possible, Mr. Chairman?
Of course, absolutely.
Thank you. It doesn't quite cut it for me. I'd like to see a wider policy where we're going to work in partnership with business and employers, probably through economic development agencies. That would be, you know, a good way to do it, and social service organisations. And I'll just give you an example. If I take Tauranga, for example, I can't for the life of me see why priority one can't be strongly advocating to the business and employment population in the city around the need to hop on buses, etc., etc. So, and similarly with social service organisations, I think I'd like to see a far stronger emphasis on working with them in terms of needs and addressing those things. So I just wonder, Mr. Chairman, whether we couldn't have a slightly wider policy range in terms of who we're going to be trying to work with. Thank you.
Apologies there, Councillor Thompson. My doorbell rang and I had to rush out and tell tell the person I'm on a Zoom and I'm chairing it, I have to get back. So I missed most of what you said, but others might want to comment.
Yep. So
Just in comment, oh, sorry, through the chair, Councillor Thompson, certainly, yep, we'll consider that, whether it's a broader policy for the existing policy or actually a new policy. So it's almost like a different sector that you're looking for us to partnership with.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Bron, who am I?
We're interchangeable.
So I see Matthew Kilpatrick has come on the screen and we can all see who he is. Matthew, do you want to introduce yourself, just because you're another new member of the team that some of our staff and our councillors in particular, but others too might not know, have met you. So can you just introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks for that. So my name is Matt Kilpatrick. I work as a senior transport planner in the Transport and Urban Planning team, and I'm helping Bron with the development of the RPTP, in particular the consultation and engagement phase of things. I joined in late 2021 in November, so you've probably seen my face around in some of these meetings, although I haven't been presenting until now. So nice to meet you all, Chair, councillors and other committee members.
Thank you for that.
Cool. If it's all right, I'll make a start on my slides. So I'm just going to be giving everyone a quick update on where we're at with the consultation engagement plan that we've been developing. And I'd just like to reiterate, this is just a quick summary of some of the key areas within it, and that a full draft of the comms and engagement plan will be more comprehensive and detailed to you all at the next PTC meeting. Cool, next slide, Bron. Yep. So yeah, we're in the process of developing a comms and engagement plan for the RPTP and leading up to the engagement period between the 4th and 29th of July. This will include information on our stakeholders and comms and engagement activities. So just a quick round of some of the stakeholders, the broad stakeholders that we have to deal with for this. These include the councils, age concerned, schools, disability services, tertiary students, over 65s, and other community providers. And as you can see through the content and Bron's policies in the RPTP, there's so many different areas that would interest different groups. So important we really share those out equally and offer reasonable participation for everyone when we're consulting. So the final comms and engagement plan will be presented at the 23 June PDC meeting.
And through the chair, just to add as well, of course, we'll be connecting, in addition to those groups mentioned, with all of our key partners, including our key stakeholders and, of course, Tangata Whenua as key partner.
Yes, that's correct. Thanks, Namuda. So what are we consulting on? Pretty much all the content that Bron's already shared already. We want to know from members of the public, our stakeholders, Tangata Whenua, if they agree or not with our challenges and opportunities. Now, for some of our stakeholders, they might not actually be too aware of some of the opportunities that we have in place, and it's sort of highlighting those because they might be aware of some of those challenges we face already. We want to hear from people on our vision and objectives and seek feedback on whether this is correct or not. It's also a chance for us to enlighten through consultation what our future public strategies are across our sub-regions, Rotorua, Eastern Bay, Tauranga, Western Bay, so on. And then just lastly, the policy topics, the more specific information. We want to share with everyone what these are, why we're doing them, and what we think the impact will be, which is obviously hopefully positive. Next slide, please, Bron. So leading the charge for our engagement will be Participate. So for those not familiar with Participate, it's an online platform that council regularly uses, and it's really awesome because you can educate users on projects, key areas within those projects, and gather feedback through questions. So the layout of Participate is really good because through the different tabs you can lay it out, so you can have a summary section on the key bits, summarizing the document, and then go into the more specific areas as you see here in this photo, where we can highlight key areas that we think are more important for certain groups, and they can go in there and provide specific feedback on that. Yeah, so we previously used Participate in our early consultation activities, and that was in July and August last year. So we'll be using it again and updating that very soon. Wider comms and engagement activities. So for consultation, we'll be looking at kicking things off with an introductory video campaign to really tell people what's going on with the RPTP, why we're consulting, and really for people to get stuck in and share their views. We'll be using a mix of Facebook posts too for our targeted audiences online, as well as website, paper, and newsletter prints. We also have a requirement to make sure that we have printed documents available. So our printed RPTP and summary documents will be available in public areas and our council too. For engagement activities, we'll obviously we're going to start with a formal notification to our key stakeholders via a letter where they can provide a formal submission, and that will be in advance of the consultation period. Other activities include online webinars, community drop-in sessions, and we're hoping to spread that around the region too, so hopefully not just in Tauranga. As Namuta said, tangata whenua are really important in this process, and we'll kick things off with them by consulting with them in advance of our engagement period through committee mauri and specialist staff members here at council who already have those connections. So just working through those key policy areas and making sure that they can have a say in advance of the engagement period. Yeah, so that's all from me in terms of this quick update. Is there any questions from the committee on any of the content I've shared?
I've got 3 questions. So Councillor Nees, Mr. Thomas, and then Councillor Thompson in that order.
Thank you. That looks awesome. Great to be using social media and participate to try and get a wider cross section of feedback. But I just want to make sure that we are still hitting some of the groups that have been very proactive in the past. For example, the Carbon Reduction Group, who are currently developing a strategy on carbon reduction, or their view of a strategy on carbon reduction in the area, EnviroHub, Sustainable Bay of Plenty, etc. So there's that, but also a large part of our services around school children and younger people. And I just want to make sure that we're thinking about doing some targeted survey too, or consultation around schools or groups that already exist that may be advocacy groups for young people and disability sectors, because obviously they're a very large part of our concern for public transport.
Yes, Councillor Nees, have noted, and we'll include all those key players within our comms and engagement plan, and you'll have more information on how we'll approach those groups in the next PDC meeting. Thanks.
Through you, Chair. Thanks, Matt. I just looking at the first item you had, which was challenges and opportunities, what these are for the region. I hope we'll also be identifying the challenges and opportunities for the sub-regions, because they are quite different from region to region. You know, a moment ago we were talking about the public safety issue, and we've got quite different things happening in Tauranga from Rotorua, obviously. So I think not only the challenges but also opportunities are different in the sub-regions. So not just an overall picture, but we need to, when we're talking to or consulting in the individual communities, we're putting something in there that's relevant to them. Totally support Councillor Nees in her desire to see us going out to the schools. And once again, in Rotorua, we've had fantastic responses from our schools and our school-age kids in terms of helping us shape the future, because actually what we're talking about here over the next 10 years is their future, not ours. So great, you know, totally support that. So thanks. Those are just my comments.
Cool. Thanks, Councillor Thomas.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to reiterate that I'd also like to see us proactively engaging with employers, and how you do that. It may well be through an umbrella organisation such as the EDAs, I'm not sure, but I certainly would like to see us, getting feedback from employers in terms of PT. Ditto for DHBs and PHOs. I think they will provide us with invaluable feedback in terms of the provision of PT for health services, and also a plea that we engage with ethnic councils across the region, so that we're getting a view in terms of different ethnic views on public transport. And one last question to you, James. Some time ago, I asked whether we could have a video done of how to use a bus. And you, I think, volunteered to be the star of that. Has that ever happened?
It hasn't happened, Councillor Thompson. Unfortunately, my agent has been too busy with other projects. But having said that, joking aside, it is something I'm still really keen on doing. We're looking at a bit of work at the moment called the Western Bay Public Transport Story, which I think is trying to combat some of perhaps the negative perceptions that unfortunately exist around the public transport network. And one of those, of course, is that it's actually difficult to use a bus. So we haven't certainly forgotten about that idea, and we're really keen to engage with an organisation that can do us some really cool videos. So we're having a meeting about that next week. So we'll absolutely make sure that some kind of video around how to use a bus, in fact how easy it is to use a bus, or it can be, would be really good as part of that. So I'll make sure that my fee rates are up to date as well for that appearance.
Well done. Listen, can I commend Councillor Thompson on bringing up the need to engage with employers and employees in business, because I think we're sort of missing a bit of an opportunity there. If where our biggest congestion is the morning commute and the evening commute, certainly it's around school children as well, but actually the Wednesday challenge is a start on the road to doing that with employers. But I think there's a huge opportunity in trying to get employers on board and incentivizing them to get their teams of staff to actually take the bus. And those sort of companies, what is now called Manawa Energy, I think, but was Trustpower, our councils, blah blah blah. They're big employers in the cities, and Rotorua's got the same, and we need to target them more, because that to me will solve the congestion issue more than anything else. And I don't think we've done it well enough to date. So that's just, I back you up 100%, Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, through the chair, yeah. I'd just like to say, yeah, Wednesday challenge, I'm glad you raised that, because they are actually doing pretty good work in that space at the moment. And if you go on the Wednesday challenge website, you will actually be able to see a leaderboard of organisations and employers as to who is actually taking up the challenge of travel behaviour change. And shout out to Craigslist in particular, because they are miles ahead of anyone else in terms of their contribution to the Wednesday challenge. So the focus of that project really over the next 2 or 3 months is to really re-engage with those employers and organisations and get everyone up to a higher standard. So certainly point very well made, and absolutely more we can do through our travel demand management and behaviour change work in the future. So thank you. And
we need it 5 days a week for those employers. That's what I'm saying. Not just a Wednesday. We actually need to grow on from there. I've got Councillor Nees and then Mr. Thomas.
Well, thank you. This isn't about the consultation. It's just a to let you know about this if you haven't seen it. It's Youth 2022. It's a vital signs report done by Acorn Foundation and others on issues in the Western Bay of Plenty around use. And it's interesting that transport is one of their top issues, one of their top priorities and under their environmental area. So transport solutions to improve access to training, employment, recreational activities and wellbeing services, especially for those outside the main centres and rural areas. So there's a lot of stuff in that which is available, and I would really recommend that staff have a look at it if they haven't already. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure they've taken that on board, and we'll probably put a copy of that in each of our councillors' boxes at the council. Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. And look, this is just a quick antidote around businesses encouraging their workers to use public transport. I was sitting in the cafeteria at Rotorua Council the other day, and someone in there was talking about how little it costs them to get into work on the bus, and the whole table they were with were going, oh, wow, we're going to try it. So I think that idea of getting into businesses is a fantastic idea. So just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you. How are we going now? Where do we move next? Wrap up.
Yeah, that's all for me now. Off to Bron again. Thanks for that.
Okay,
Thank
Brian,
you,
you do a
Matthew
bit of a
and
wrap
Chair.
up. Yeah, you do a wrap up, and then I'm going to ask Namuta to give a final summation.
Okay, sure. Maybe it's probably best for Namuta to do a brief summary now, and then I'll talk about the sort of our original desired outcome and our next steps from that.
Yep. So through the chair, we've had quite a good discussion today. We've got lots of notes. I just wanted to quickly summarise the discussion that we've had just to make sure we've got down all the key points. So taking you back to the beginning, you'll recall in terms of that context section, you asked us to just check and make sure that the whakatane targeted rates are mentioned. You raised and talked quite a bit about the safety and security issues and making sure that that is represented through not just the challenge section, but also in the objectives and the focus areas. You asked us to ensure that all of the summaries that were provided for the different sub-regions were correct. You asked us to look into the UFTI traffic and seek a bit more of a breakdown of understanding what's happening there and why traffic is increasing. You asked us to particularly think about emissions reduction and to have some quite hard, clear targets within that. You asked us to look at the park and ride features, particularly in the Western Bay, to make sure they are included and represented. You asked us to ensure that we're really clear that for subsidised services, the requirement needed for a B card. You asked us to also make sure that we check on the dates in relation to the trials, and we noted that we'd come back to the annual plan to provide greater clarity around that. In terms of collaboration, you asked us to include under the key focus area of collaboration, making sure that we include discussion around a better way to integrate service delivery. You asked us to be clearer in terms of the economics of public transport and be able to bring you back some more information at the next Public Transport Committee. In terms of the financials and the breakdowns and the costs associated with funding travel. Under the future strategy area, there was a discussion around Rotorua Consultation, and we're going to receive some feedback on that. You've asked us to beef up the carbon emissions components and perhaps refer to ferries. You asked us to look at bus decarbonisation in particular, and again, the emphasis on those real targets and what we're doing. There was a note to make sure that we ensure the connection and with the PT strategy work that's going on in the Eastern Bay to make sure that we have the most up-to-date information going into the regional public transport plan. And that wasn't just with the PT strategy in the East, but making sure that we have the most up-to-date information in terms of the operating environment, what's happening as well. There was a note around ensuring we're really clear on Rotorua being a tier 2 city and what that means in terms of lead time of services, lag time, and new service models, including feeder services for Rotorua in particular. You asked us to just think about those spatial planning updates at the Regional Transport Committee, and you've asked us to provide some more detail in terms of the PT strategy going on in the East. In addition, there was in the Western Bay and in Tauranga, you asked us to specifically make sure we include in those sections the on-demand trial opportunity too. And then under the policies and actions, there was discussion around total mobility and making sure we've got all the information that we need. And there was a note around the importance of access to bus stops. Under the service and infrastructure delivery, you talked about making sure we really bring forward that safety and security discussion. You talked about the importance of having security for the PT services and incorporating that. There was discussion around the accessibility concession and making sure that that's in there, and also reference to Appendix B and the consideration of those inter-regional services. You asked us to look at the performance, service performance policy 3.7 in terms of working with partners to add working with partners to improve safety and reliability and punctuality, as well as reviewing personal safety and security and acting appropriately to mitigate customers' concerns or something along words to that effect. We had a really good conversation around vehicle size and weight, and you flagged the concerns about the heavy vehicles, the weight of electric vehicles and the impact on local roads. You asked us to include to add customer appeal as well as the consideration of that, the impact of weight within that policy. In terms of rapid transit corridor component, you asked us to give some thought in terms of consultation, given UFTI wasn't broadly consulted on with the public and just the implications there. And you asked us to really broaden out that partnership. In terms of that partnership component, you did ask us to broaden it out. You asked us to also include advocacy and making it simpler, advocacy for simpler, more consistent processes and for public transport services and decision-making and broader decision-making frameworks. Then there was a discussion around pricing and fares, and we note the action that of undertaking the fare review and the technical piece of work. And also just noting the work going on nationally and how that might impact those provisions. And you asked us, I mentioned before, you asked us to broaden out the communities component of that fares and price. The communities component to working with businesses, employers, and social service organisations. And then finally, just under that consultation and engagement plan, you asked us to make sure we include those key stakeholder groups, Carbon Reduction Group, Enviro Hub, Sustainable Bay of Plenty, and others, school students, younger people, making sure we target that group, and as well as the disability sector. You also really emphasise the importance of connecting with employers and employees, the DHBs, the PHOs, those health services, as well as ethnic councils across the region. And you asked us to be really clear when we are consulting and connecting that we make sure that is locally specific conversations going on in terms of locally specific challenges, opportunities within the areas. And finally, you asked us to follow up on that action about developing a video for how to use a bus. So those were, I guess, essentially the key notes that we've got down, as well as the notes that Bron has taken as we've progressed through the conversation.
Did you mention the need, the desire that Councillor Thompson said to actually talk to employers and across the region to see how we can best service them and encourage them to get their staff on it? I think that's a really key one.
Yep. Got that. Yep.
Councillor Thurston, did you want something?
I was just going to say that was the most amazing wrap up I've ever witnessed.
Well done.
Indeed, Namuta.
Yeah.
Oh,
You're either a very fast typist or
We- Through the chair,
What's
we've been listening. We're taking it on board.
we've been listening.
wow.
No, that was very well presented. Thank you.
Then we'll just finish with next steps in terms of the timeline going forward.
Yep.
Thank you, Namuta and Chair. So really just wanted to go back to our original outcome that we were seeking in this workshop, and really wanted to gauge members' comfort in terms of how the draft RPT is shaping up, and whether, subject to obviously quite a few detailed amendments to the document, we might be in a position in 6 weeks' time to make a decision to release it for public consultation. Obviously, my intention here from this point on is to have all the amendments and revisions and track changes so that we can see what exactly has changed since this current iteration. Yeah, so conscious of our requirements in terms of timelines, and if we were to deliver a regional public transport plan by the close of this triennium, then yeah, there's probably a critical need to make a decision at that June meeting. Yeah, so just
there's been quite a bit added today, Bron. So I think you're on the right track, absolutely. But we do want to see the final document if we could get it circulated, so we've got plenty of time to actually and probably put input to you prior to it actually going to a formal meeting to see if we can't get it really tidy, because you're right, the year is with elections coming, we want to see if we can get this tidied up before the end of this triennium. So that will be a challenge, but I think it's possible. Councillor Nees.
Thank you. I do think we've got a risk that we didn't have a representative from the Eastern Bay here, and we didn't have Mayor Weber from the Western Bay, and we didn't have Tauranga City representation either. One in particular has been quite critical of our planning, and I wouldn't like to think that we get the plan up to the PT committee and it gets shot down in some areas. So I just wonder if staff could think about a strategy to bring them up to speed so that they are aware of what was discussed prior to the formal agenda landing, because I do think that is a little bit of a risk, because we've got some quite vocal people that actually haven't had the opportunity to participate in what I think has been a very good workshop. Really want to thank staff and everybody that's input for the way they've done that, but we do have some people that are missing, and whether or not you can provide your summary of the things that you wanted that are going to be updated. I don't know, just to try and bring those people along with us that are not actually, well, I'm not quite sure actually whether they're decision makers on the plan or not. It's the regional council, I guess, that signs it off ultimately. But I think it's just a risk that we need to manage.
Yeah, just to be aware, we do have a couple of Tauranga City staff who have been in here. They haven't spoken, but they've been listening, and I'm sure if we were out of alignment with what the city's thinking, they would have spoken up, but they can give some feedback to the commissioners, I'm sure, to help with that. We have Councillor Brunning and yourself helping the Western Bay. I know we didn't have Western Bay councillors per se, but yeah, I just want to thank staff for the amount of work that's gone into this, and I think we're making really good progress.
So through the chair as
Joe.
well.
Yeah, sorry. You first, Namuta, and then Joe Metcalf.
Yeah, so through the chair as well, of course, we're recording this session, so we will ensure that the recordings of the sessions go to all the members who weren't able to be here today. We'll also ask that any additional comments or feedback go through to both to James and through to Bron. So that's another avenue.
Joe.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, just noting that I'll take feedback through to Mayor Turner as well regarding the conversation. But from a sort of Whakatane perspective, there's nothing here that I don't think will be particularly concerning for her. I think she's followed the process through to date and has been reasonably comfortable where things have got to.
Okay. Anybody else want to have concluding comment, or have you got any more to say, Bron?
No, that's good. Good wrap up to the discussion. Thanks everyone for your feedback, and I'll work feverishly away to address some of the things that have been raised at today's workshop and see if I can get a draft in front of you as soon as I can.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the work staff have done on this. It's starting to come together. Yeah, it is a big piece of work. So I think we've put a lot more food for thought to tidy it up. And so we look forward to seeing where it gets to next. Thank you very much. And thank you for all of your attention to both councillors and staff. Well done. And I close the meeting at 12:21.